Hey everybody, I wanted to talk to my Magic players today and just briefly describe to you guys some good questions and things to think about when it comes to metagaming and constructed standard on MTG, especially for the new people who have come into the game from Magic the Gathering arenas. I just wanted to give you guys some fast insight on how I metagame, some tools for, or at least one tool for metagaming, and then just the mentality of thinking in the way that you need to think in order to metagame. So the first thing that I really need to encourage in people is you need to ask questions about each individual match you've played in. In the match itself, it's important to have questions about how did I die, what deck am I playing against, how do I sideboard, what are the lines of play that this deck is going to make against me, what are the lines of play I'm going to make against this deck, and being able to quickly recognize these things in the game so that you kind of go back to the exact same thing for every single matchup against the same deck. Because the whole idea of a metagame is that there are certain decks that are going to be more prevalent than others because they're successful. So fortunately, you can predict how to address these decks and how to combat them appropriately. The first thing I wanted to show you guys is my primary tool for getting a quick snapshot at the metagame in Standard Constructed is MTGO Goldfish. This website is amazing. It gives so much information and data on the metagame, and it draws that data from Magic the Gathering Online, paper events, and I might even have started drawing them from arena events, but I don't think very much yet. Generally, it's mostly Magic the Gathering Online and paper Magic. Both of those sources of competition are very competitive, and there's very good players when it comes to gleaning that data. So consider those the data from MTGO and the data from paper Magic to be experienced players combating each other to the point where they certain decks get filtered out and you see a true metagame. And currently, this standard is pretty consistent right now with some changes here and there with what decks are doing the best. But at the end of the day, you can really kind of anticipate to see just a certain number of about 5, 6, maybe even up to like 8 decks regularly. But I would say the top 4, top 5 decks you're going to see pretty frequent. So having a game plan for each of them, understanding those decks, how to address them, is absolutely integral for you being successful in playing a more competitive meta or constructed event. One question you need to be good at answering very quickly within the first couple turns of the match, of the first game of the match, and that is what am I playing against? You need to be able to recognize cards that come down in the first 1 or 2 turns, or just be able to identify lands that might only be played in certain decks. So, and this isn't too hard to do. Like Golgari mid-range, if you see green and like a green-black tap land, or I'm sorry, a green-black split land and a Land War Elf on turn 1, you're probably playing against Golgari mid-range. Branchwalker comes down after that, you're probably against Golgari mid-range, So just being able to identify that stuff very quickly, that's a pretty basic skill, but you need to be able to do it. If you can't tell you're playing against a control deck and you start playing all of your cards out as an aggro deck really quick and don't hold some back in case they have a sweeper, you might get blown out. So being able to recognize Jeskai control, and it might be a little bit more difficult, but if they're playing blue, they got a bunch of split lands coming down, probably on a control deck. That's one thing. You need to be able to identify what deck you're playing against, because you can't set up your game plan if you think you're playing against something when you're playing against something else. Another question you have to answer every deck that you're playing against is whether or not this deck is an aggro deck, mid-range deck, or control deck. And that's just understanding the deck again as well. Being able to identify what you're up against very quickly. But each of those are going to play out very differently, and sometimes you're going to play against these weird brews that will fit into one of those 3 archetypes always. They will always fit into those 3 archetypes unless there's a combo deck, but thank God there's not. So really understanding, did this guy just play a 1-drop and a 2-drop? It's probably aggro. if they're kind of beater cards. Did this guy just play 2 split lands and an opt? He's probably playing control of some sort or a tempo. Things like that. Understanding what archetype you're up against will help you do well against the deck, even if it's not an actual meta deck or if it is an actual meta deck. Understanding that Boros Weenie is a dump your hand aggro deck that's going to try to blast your face as fast as it possibly can is pretty important for beating it. So understand what archetype the deck you're playing against fulfills. The next question you need to be able to answer are, what are the key cards in this deck that are problematic for me? In really good decks, it's like every card, so it doesn't matter that much, but certain cards are better against your deck than they would be against other decks. That's the cool thing about Magic, is this deck might be good against this deck, but it's bad against this deck, whatever, you know? So key cards that are important to anticipate really is what you need to do with them. You need to anticipate these cards being played, because certain cards aren't necessarily going to get you killed the way some cards will. Some cards are going to tear the game apart for you if you don't answer them appropriately. Along with understanding what deck you're playing against is understanding how the deck is going to play out, what the optimal lines of play for that deck are, and what the optimal lines of play are against your deck. It doesn't matter if Jeskai Control likes to do something against Golgari midrange if you're playing another control deck. But being able to identify things like that in each deck, use MTGO Goldfish to do this. Come through these, check out these lists, and learn about these decks, how they're built out and what is good in them, so that when you get beat by them, come in here, check it out, and start understanding how that deck plays out. Along those lines, you also need to understand what your matchup is against certain decks. This also is going to tie into sideboarding. You need to understand, okay, how is let's say I'm Boros Weenie, which is an aggro deck. How is my matchup against Golgari midrange? Can they outclass me too quickly? What do they use to deal with me if I go really fast? So having a sideboard that has things to address these, especially these decks in the top of the standard metagame, is going to be really important. Don't put cutesy ass cards in your sideboard. I don't care if you like it. All that you need in your sideboard are cards that make each of these matchups better. You have to understand why every single one of your 15 sideboard cards is in your sideboard. You have to go, this is my sideboard card, this is what it's addressing in this deck, or something like along those lines. Or this is my sideboard card, this is what it is addressing in these 2 decks. So these are just some quick tips for how to metagame appropriately in Magic the Gathering. And again, if you are an MTG Arena player, I hope this stuff helps a little bit. I'm totally down to give you guys more in-depth input on how to metagame appropriately, how to address certain decks in the metagame. How to understand what you're sideboarding, why you're sideboarding it, and not sideboarding too much sometimes, things like that. Very, very important. So I'm totally down to give you more insight on that. Just let me know if you guys have any other input on this video, or if you guys have any other tips you'd like to add in the comments below. By all means, add them and let me know what you think. So that's it. I'm thinking about trying to make some more specific videos on addressing certain decks in the current metagame. If you guys are interested in that, please give me some input. Let me know. So take care, guys. I will see you.